Today is Reformation Sunday. Did it have any impact on you at all? Do you know what it is? The Reformation, was a big deal. It didn't actually start with Martin Luther. It had started sometime before that, but it culminated, it started really getting intense with this guy called Martin Luther. You've heard of him, I hope. Martin Luther. A little context here. Martin Luther was born in the city of Eisleben. He was born to a peasant father and mother. His father worked in the copper mines. But when Luther was about 6 months old, Hans, his father, moved the family to a town called Mansfeld. And there he was able to rent some copper mines, a smelting furnace, and over a period of time he became a respected member of the community, wealthy. And as young Luther grew, his father recognized in him that he was an intellectual young man. By the 6th grade, Luther had mastered Latin and could speak and write Latin with ease. Father was excited about that. And so when Luther graduated from high school and finished his initial studies in college, his father encouraged him to study law. You see, having a business at that time was kind of shaky. You needed to protect it. And it's kind of like, if you were working at Twitter today and Elon Musk took over. So Luther was encouraged by his father, more than encouraged, was sent by his father to study law. And he did. And he was a good law student. And one summer, coming back from a vacation, he was caught in a terrific thunderstorm. He was so frightened, he was absolutely certain he was going to die. He fell to the ground. He prayed to St. Anne, "St. Anne, help me, and I'll become a monk." Obviously, Luther survived the thunderstorm, and he kept his promise. His father wasn't particularly delighted in that. He decided to become a monk. He joined a monastery, and he drove his superiors crazy. He was a real pain in the neck. He came to confession frequently, multiple times every day. He'd beat himself as punishment for his sins. He could not believe that God would accept him. He was too aware of his own sinfulness and was certain that God was going to condemn him because of it. Finally, his superior got frustrated. He said, "Enough of this." And he sent him off to school again. He says, "Go study, become a doctor. Maybe that'll help." And so Luther did. He began studying, began teaching. And he says that it was as he was preparing to teach a book of Romans that he came across a verse right at the beginning of the book of Romans. Romans 1:17. The righteous one will live by faith. By faith. It jumped out at Luther. He continued to study the book of Romans, and this passage from today's lesson struck him as well. For we hold that a person is justified by faith, not by works prescribed by the law. It was as if a light bulb came on over Luther's head. He suddenly realized that all the works he was doing would not make God love him anymore, would not make God forgive him anymore. And he began to teach that. He taught it frequently. He taught it regularly. Now, one of the practices of the church of the day was something called penance. You had to go to confession regularly, which Luther had done a lot of. You would hear the priest say, "God forgives you." But that's not quite enough. God has forgiven you, but now you have to do something to complete that forgiveness. And they called that penance. So if you did enough penance, you were assured that God would forgive you and welcome you in after you die. But you never knew for sure if you'd done enough. So people were always a little uneasy, uncertain. Well, the church came up with a wonderful way to make money. I always thought in here we should sell bulletins, but that doesn't go over very well. Instead, they sold indulgences. By buying an indulgence, you could reduce the amount of time and work you had to do after you'd been forgiven. Then they took it one step further. You could even buy indulgences for family members who had died and were now resting in that halfway house called purgatory. You could release them from purgatory by buying indulgences. It raised a lot of money for the church. But Luther was incensed by this. When a man named Tetzel came near to his congregation and began telling them that they could buy God's forgiveness, that was the last straw. And he decided that it was time to have a discussion with the leaders of the church, with the teachers. And he posted topics for discussion. We called them theses. 95 of them nailed to the church door at Wittenberg on October 31st. October 31st was the eve of a holy day, All Saints' Day. It was All Hallows' Eve. It was Halloween. So Luther nailed these 95 theses to the door, hoping that he would have a discussion. Instead, he angered the church so much that he got kicked out. And when he refused to recant, they decided that anyone who could capture him could put him to death. But Luther continued. He continued writing, continued preaching, because he felt that it was absolutely necessary for people to hear this good news. That the gospel means that God's grace and love and forgiveness is free. Jesus said that. In fact, he said that in the gospel reading for this morning, which I didn't read. But when Jesus is talking to those who are following him, he says to them, "You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And while they don't understand that, he says, "If the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." Freedom. That's what Luther realized in this gift of grace. God has set him free. He doesn't need to be worried about his relationship with God. But as I paraphrase Dietrich Bonhoeffer, this gift is free, but it's not cheap. It cost Jesus his life. But Jesus invites those people who are listening to him to become his disciples, to continue in his word. And that's what Luther worked hard to do. He wanted to teach people about this good news. He wanted the parents to teach people about this good news. We have something called the Catechism. We use this in confirmation. Teachers use it. Pastors use it in confirmation. But Luther wrote it for parents. He wanted parents to teach their children this good news and the very basics of the Christian faith. He wanted them to teach them exactly what was promised this morning at the baptismal font. Teach them the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, and the Ten Commandments, because they're basic to the Christian way of life. Then Luther realized that people still were thinking in terms of freedom, but they didn't understand that this freedom carried with it an invitation to become involved in God's kingdom here. And so Luther continued to talk about works not as a way of achieving God's grace and forgiveness, but as a way of living out this freedom, this good news. This is stewardship time here at Olivet. And stewardship means much more than simply giving money. It means being committed to the work of the church, the work of Jesus Christ in this place. I have the honor of welcoming up here an esteemed member of our church council, but also a member of the Lifelong Learning Commission, And so she and I are going to talk a little bit about our commitment to Christ as disciples in terms of our stewardship. And she has to turn the microphone on, and it takes a moment to do that. And these are incredibly comfortable chairs I discovered this morning. So if I fall asleep, you'll have to forgive me here now.
I
Jill.
think we're good. Yeah,
This is Jill Christopher, by the way. I didn't even say what her name was, did I?
that's okay.
That's okay. All right. So, as a member of the Lifelong Learning Commission, how do you see our response as stewards of this good news?
So one of the things we work on at Lifelong Learning is faith formation from the time you are born until you're well into your adult life. And so I think it really is this idea of how can we make sure we're helping others along in their faith journey. So from Sunday school teachers, mentors in confirmation, small group leaders, all of that is so important in giving our kids another outlet, another person to talk through their faith journey and to learn from on their faith journey.
So when we talk about stewardship, often we're thinking, again, just simply about giving, about money. But stewardship is also about sharing the gifts, the talents, the abilities that God has given us with other members, particularly, as you've said, the importance of sharing with young people. I'm thinking about our confirmands who are going through the process of confirmation this afternoon. And they have had mentors, and they talk about how important the mentors were in their life, how important their small group leaders were in their faith development. We've got at least one confirmand sitting right there, and she told me that same thing. So yes, it's important. Our stewardship means really being a good steward of these gifts and this grace that God has given us.
Yeah, there's a lot that we've been through in our life that we can share with someone else. You know, I think often people talk about the world as very different, but I don't know if it is. There's always challenges that everyone's going through. There's things that you've been through in your life, hardships, things, that it's not always the easiest to talk to your parents about, per se. I don't know. I guess my mom is really smart, but as a teen, I didn't always think she was. And sometimes it's not easy to ask those questions to a parent, but a mentor or a Sunday school teacher, a confirmation leader, those are people that can be extra resources, extra people, and you can share the things that you've gone through in your life for the better of the youth of today.
And in the process of doing that, you really respond to Jesus' call to continue in his word, to be his disciples, and to share the gospel with those who are desperately in need. When we think of stewardship, or when I think of stewardship, I'm always reminded of this old prayer that we used to use in here. It was the prayer after the offering. It would say this: "We offer with joy and thanksgiving what you've first given us, ourselves, our time, and our possessions, signs of your gracious love." As you consider your offerings, your tithes, your commitment, may the good news that you're set free, that God forgives you and loves you, may that empower you to respond as disciples of Christ, being good stewards of all that God has given you. Amen.